Okay, let's take a look at the items that we want to look through for this interpretation. There are four basic assumptions. Let's take a look at them. So assumption number one is that the period of Daniel 8 begins in 457 BC. That must be true in order for this timeline to be correct. Next assumption is that Daniel 8 must be interpreted as 2,300 literal years. And the final assumption for this interpretation is that the prophecy references Yom Kippur in Daniel 8, the Day of Atonement, and it's referring to a Yom Kippur in heaven. Okay. Additionally, there are some other references that I'm going to include at the end of this to show a distinction between this interpretation and some other possibilities that might be more clear. Okay. So the first thing to look at here is Daniel 8. Is Daniel 8 and Daniel 9, are they co-incident? Do they occur at the same time? Do they begin at the same time? That is a fundamental question in order for the year 457 BC to be the beginning point of this prophecy. So does Daniel 8 and Daniel 9, do they begin at the exact same time? Okay, let's take a look at Daniel 8. We're going to look at a lot of this passage because the majority of this interpretation is drawn directly from a verse in this passage. And so it's really important to understand that verse in context and see if it really makes sense and applies to this interpretation. And then we'll look at Daniel 9 as well and see if there is even similar context between the two chapters. Okay. So let's take a look here at Daniel 9, or Daniel 8 first, pardon me. So I'm going to pull this from Bible Hub. There are many online programs you can pull this from. This has a ton of online Bible texts that you can use. It even has interlinear and some of the other useful tools that we'll use later in our discussion. So for right now, we're going to work through Daniel 8, okay? So starting in verse 1. In the third year of the reign of Belshazzar, a vision appeared to me, even unto me, Daniel. After that which appeared to me at the first, I saw in a vision, and it came to pass that I saw that I was at Shushan in the palace, which is in the province of Elam. And I saw in the vision that I was by the river Ulai. Then I lifted up mine eyes, and I saw, and behold, there stood before me, before the river, a ram which had two horns, and the two horns were high, but one was higher than the other. And the higher came up last. I saw the ram pushing westward and northward and southward, so that no beasts might stand before him. Neither was there any that could deliver out of his hand, but he did according to his will, and became great. And as I considered, behold, an he-goat came from the west, on the face of the whole earth, and touched not the ground. And the goat had a notable horn between his eyes, and it came to the ram with two horns, which I had seen standing before the river, and ran unto him a fury and power. And I saw him come close unto the ram, and he was moved with choler against him, and smote the ram, and brake his two horns. And there was no power in the ram to stand before him. But he cast him down to the ground, and stomped upon him, and there was none that could deliver the ram out of his hand. Therefore the goat waxed great, and when he was strong, the great horn was broken, and for it came up four notable ones toward the four winds of the heaven. And out of one of them came forth a little horn, which waxed exceedingly great toward the south, and toward the east, and toward the pleasant land. And it waxed great even to the host of heaven, and it cast down some of the host of the stars to the ground and stomped upon them. Yea, it magnified himself even to the prince of hosts, and by him the daily sacrifice was taken away, and the place of his sacrifice was cast down. And a host was given him against the daily sacrifice by reason of transgression, and they cast down truth to the ground, but it practiced and prospered. And I heard one saint speaking to another saint, saying unto that certain saint which spake, How long shall the vision concerning the daily sacrifice and the transgression of desolation, to give both the sanctuary and the hosts, be trodden under foot? And he said unto me, Under 2,300 days, then shall the sanctuary be cleansed. Okay, a lot of stuff going on there. I don't want to, so if you want to continue reading, that's fine. There's a portion here where Daniel has trouble. He doesn't understand the vision, and that's often interpreted to mean that he just couldn't handle it anymore. And that's fine. But we're going to skip down to, let's see here. We're going to skip to verse, let's look at verse 18. Okay. Verse 18 says, Now as he was speaking to me, I was in a deep sleep, and my face was toward the ground. But he touched me and set me upright, and said, Behold, I will make thee know what shall be in the last end of the indignation, for at the appointed time shall the end shall be. The ram which thou sawest having two horns are the kings of Media and Persia. The rough goat is the kingdom of Grecia, and the great horn that is between his eyes is the first king. Now that being broken, whereas four stood up for it, the kingdom shall stand up, 4 kingdoms shall stand up out of the nation, but not in his power. In the latter time of their kingdoms, when transgressions are come to the full, a king of fierce countenance and outstanding dark sentences shall stand up, and his power shall be mighty, but not by his own power. And he shall destroy wonderfully, and shall prosper and practice, and shall destroy the mighty and the holy ones. Through his policy also shall cause the craft to prosper in his hand, and he shall magnify himself in the heart, and by peace shall destroy many. He shall stand up against the prince of princes, but he shall be broken without hand. And the vision of the evenings and the mornings which was told is true. Therefore shut up the vision, for it is for many days. All right. A lot of stuff going on there. We have an interpretation. We don't have to guess what Daniel 8 is referring to. The only real disagreement about Daniel 8 and its interpretation is how long this period of time is that's being referenced, because at least the first 2 aspects of this vision are given in the text. There is very little disagreement about that. So let's talk about that which everybody agrees to. So we have the Media-Persia Empire, Medo-Persia. Then we have Greece taking over with the first king, Alexander the Great. From him, we have 4 other kingdoms that come up. And then from one of those, and then the passage is kind of important in how it words this. Verse 23 says, And in the latter time of their kingdom, then shall transgression come to a full, a king of fierce countenance and understanding dark sentences shall stand up. Okay. This part of the passage has been taken to transform from Greece all the way up to 500 some AD. That's how this has been interpreted by the Adventists in order to make the 1844 message true. Okay, because the little horn is being identified as papal Rome, and the papacy certainly didn't exist in Greece or even Rome. It was well after that period of time. Christianity wasn't even a thing. That the term Christians weren't even used until Paul's day, after Jesus. So all of that stuff is well into the future. So the question for us to examine here in verse 23 is, did this really skip after? So we've got the four kingdoms break up, and then we don't talk much at all about any of the build of Roman Empire and all the stuff associated with that. We immediately warp forward well past Jesus to talk about this kingdom. Some of the interpretations around 1844 are circular, some of the arguments. They force you to assume that this is true in order for it to be true. An example is that some of the passages from Daniel, we assume, are the same passages that occur in Revelation, not because Revelation references Daniel, but because they are similar in number or language or use, and therefore they must be the same, and therefore if they're the same, then they must be the same. So it is not, there are some cases where it is true that there are commonalities between them, but we can't just automatically assume that those commonalities exist outside of other evidence. And even if we make that assumption, we have to be ready to recognize that it is an assumption. So here we are, taking this between verse 22 and verse 23. We've made this warp forward of several hundred years in time. Okay, so we have more information though about the little horn, all the way down to the point that he's going to be broken without, but not by hand, in verse 25. So if this is the papacy, if this little horn that causes the daily sacrifice to end, and all these other things that are listed up here in verse 11, he magnifies himself against the Prince of Hosts, caused the daily sacrifice to be taken away, the sanctuary to be cast down, and the daily sacrifice by reason of transgression is cast down to the ground, practiced and prospered. Okay, if that is what the papacy did, and this little horn represents the papacy, then he must match all these other things, especially verse 25 that says that he will be broken but without hand. Okay, if that's true, if this is the papacy, then we must assume that either this has or will be fulfilled. Okay, that's what Daniel 8 says. All right, let's take a look at Daniel 9. So I'm going to flip over here to Daniel 9. Now, Daniel 9 starts off with a prayer. Daniel, let's do this so we can talk. So Daniel 9 starts off with a prayer. It's a great prayer. You should read it. Whether you read anything else and anything else that I'm going to talk about today, if you come away with nothing else, please read Daniel 9 up to verse, let's take a look, up to verse 19, because this is really an important intercessory prayer. Daniel is taking some time to pray because he sees his people, the people of God, are not following the path that God has called out. He sees the prophecy, Jerusalem's going to be destroyed for 70 years. He reads that prophecy and he takes a look at the people around him as the 70 years are coming to a conclusion, and he says, we're not ready. And this is the prayer of Daniel. He says, we are not ready. He recognizes there's an aspect here that I think is often missed in Christendom. The Christian worldview often tends to be more of individual salvation and forgets corporate salvation. And Daniel shows a clear distinction. He shows that he's expecting God's people to be saved. And there's a powerful aspect of this, and where Daniel is standing up and saying, "Hey, we've got problems. We've broken the law. We are not ready for the salvation that you promised at the end of the 70 years, and he's confessing the sins of the people." Read it. All right. So then in the next few verses there from Daniel 9, verse 20 through 23, we have a reference of an angel coming to visit Daniel and give him a message, and that's an important passage. We shouldn't ignore it. I'm just not going to read it at this instant. All right, so here's the passage that we're specifically interested in. So it says, verse 24, 70 weeks. We'll come back and talk about all this. Don't panic. So 70 weeks are determined upon thy people and upon the holy city to finish transgressions and to make end of sins and to make reconciliation for iniquity and to bring everlasting righteousness, to seal up the vision and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy. Know therefore and understand that from the going forth of the command to restore and rebuild Jerusalem unto the Messiah the Prince shall be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. The street shall be built again, and the wall even in troubled times. After 62 weeks shall the Messiah be cut off, but not for himself. The people of the Prince shall come and shall destroy the city and the sanctuary, and the end thereof shall be with a flood. And unto the end of the war desolations are determined. And he shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week, and in the midst of the week he shall cause the sacrifice and oblation to cease. For the outspread of the abomination he shall make it desolate, even unto the consummation, and to determined shall be poured upon the desolate. Okay. English, King James English is very difficult to read at times, and it goes out of its way to make my life difficult. Okay, so let's talk about this. From the order to go to restore and rebuild Jerusalem. Okay, this is the starting point that is used to talk about the 2,300 days. There's several reasons why it's used that way, but let's just look at it in the context and see if it makes sense. So, the order to restore and rebuild Jerusalem. Sounds like a construction effort, right? They're going to build Jerusalem. The order to restore and rebuild Jerusalem. Okay. What was the beginning point of the 2,300 days that we just saw in the last passage? Well, let's flip back. And we'll do this. So, this one started back here somewhere. Let's look at verse 9. And out of them came forth a little horn, which waxed exceedingly toward the south, toward the east, and toward the pleasant land. And it waxed great, and even to the host of heaven. It cast down some of the hosts of the stars to the ground, stamped upon them. Yea, he magnified himself even to the Prince of hosts, and by him the daily sacrifice was taken away, and his place of sanctuary was cast down, and the host was given to him against the daily sacrifice by reason of transgression, and it cast down the truth to the ground, and it practiced and prospered. Then I heard one speaking, and another said, a saint said unto the certain saint which spake, how long shall be the vision concerning the daily sacrifice and transgression and desolation, to give both the sanctuary and the host be trodden underfoot? Okay, kind of important. If we have a question and an answer, it's really important to understand the question in order to interpret what the answer means. Otherwise, I could just say 42. What does 42 mean? I don't know. What's the question? All right, so here's what we've got. We've got the 2,300 days is the answer to the question of how long is he going to get away with destroying and trotting the sanctuary and the people underfoot. That's the question. The answer is 2,300 days. Okay, so we have destruction occurring. How long is it going to occur? 2,300 days. When does it begin? Logically, when all the destruction and stuff occurs, right? That's what the passage is referring to. That is literally what it says. I'm not making this up. By all means, please take out your Bible, read what it says, and tell me if you feel that this is an error. Daniel 9's prophecy. When does that start? Well, he gives us a clear time. The question is, when's it going to begin? From the order to restore and rebuild Jerusalem. Now, I've seen many Revelation seminars that take the question of Daniel 8, how long is the vision, and then flip immediately in their slides to Daniel 9:25 or Daniel 9:24 and 25 and say that that's the answer. That is not an accurate and truthful representation of Scripture, because these are not related passages. In my opinion, these passages show very different events in history. One of them is demonstrating something where the little horn is causing all kinds of destruction. And that is the marking point of the beginning of these 2,300 days that is spoken about in the King James Bible. The other one is talking about the beginning of the time to restore and rebuild Jerusalem. Those starting points, it does not make sense to put them together, because one has destruction as a starting point and the other has the rebuild as a starting point. Does that make sense? So I don't think that these two are even related. Therefore, if they're not related, upon assumption number one, we already have a fairly serious problem. 1844's interpretation can only be true if all three of these assumptions are correct. And upon assumption number one, which is the beginning date, based solely on the context of the passages, it does not make sense. And we'll go well beyond the passages and demonstrate further why it doesn't make sense. But solely on the context of the passages, it does not make sense to say that these two are related. Okay? So this is part of the first assumption. So this is assumption number one. In my opinion, this cannot be backed up on a biblical basis. Okay, so assumption number one. Let's move on.